Alright guys, so this is our third video I think in this kind of series where we're going through all the parts that are in the car. And a lot of people have asked for that, which is kind of why we're doing that. Plus, the guys at Brian Crowler are really cool and they send me all the parts that I ask for, because I'm like, hey, I'm doing a video. They've been really great about sending me stuff to show you guys and show you what to expect when you get it. So what they've sent us here is the Valvetrain. Now we have, this is valve stems. So we got exhaust and intake, and then we also have our springs and retainers that we use in the car. So I'm going to pull those boxes out, kind of show you what they look like, and explain, I guess, what they are to some degree. So we're going to start off with the valves. Always get your BC sticker. So what you have is these are, I believe, intake valves. The intake valves are bigger than the exhaust valves by quite a bit. So, and these are the +1 millimeter valves, which is what I have in the car. They're stainless steel, and I like these mostly because I needed a +1 valve. I took the heads and we got them matched. We machined the valve seat in the head to match the ankle grinds on these valves. We did a 5 ankle grind to match that. And these are stainless steel, so they're pretty strong. I will say the stock Subaru valve is sodium filled, I think. And so it's like hollow down in the middle, and they fill it with sodium, and it's supposed to be kind of a cheaper way to make a valve stronger. I think when my piston slammed into my Valvetrain, when I threw a rod, I only had 2 bent valves, so that wasn't too bad, and the head was still salvageable. The cool thing is these are stainless, they're polished, so they're not going to keep a bunch of crud on them. And I will say the stock Subaru valve, when I pulled it, seemed really rough and I wouldn't say corroded. It had a lot of carbon buildup on it, and that was even after doing some treatment for carbon buildup on your Valvetrain. Now when you install these, you have your cam card like what we talked in the cam shaft video, and it's going to say you need a certain clearance. Now there's 2 ways to do that. You can either take the buckets or shims, if you're WRX, that make up the difference between the valve seat and where your cam lobe hits. So you have a little cap or a shim that sits on top of this, and if you're changing out the caps, you have to measure what the cap spacing is and figure out what your valve lash should be and the difference, whether it's plus or minus, and then you have to order the right caps. They all have different measurements in them, and they're like 10 or buckets or whatever they call them, and they're about, gosh, I don't remember, like $8 to $10 a piece, maybe a little bit more than that. And so what we did when we built these is, instead of doing that, if you take it to a head builder, which I would suggest, because it's just kind of a tedious process, compressing those springs, putting everything together, measuring it all, taking it apart, putting it back together. It takes a lot of time, especially when you're trying to get the keepers in these little grooves right here. So what we did instead was we machined these down to make the current buckets we have work, and it's been working really well. It's just kind of another common way to do it if you have enough clearance. Like, you don't want to be taking a lot off of these, but they should be pretty close to OEM size anyways. My experience was they were all just a little bit long, so that made it kind of easy to machine them all down. So we have a full set of intake valves. I believe of intake. We'll pull these out and show you the difference between these and exhaust valves. Here we go. So the same length, which you'll notice the dish for the valve is quite a bit smaller for the exhaust side. And it's just once everything's burned up. Plus these are letting in fuel and air together. These are just letting out hot air. So there's obviously a little bit of difference there. Again, the larger the valve you run and the larger your cam you run, the more air you allow to escape the cylinder more efficiently. And it also goes with like porting cylinder heads and even polishing the cylinder cap or dish or whatever you want to call it there. So that's our valves. Really cool that they send us some of these to play with and kind of show. And I'll put these back in a second. Let's track those. The next thing they sent me, which is these same Valvetrain I'm running in my car, is these springs and retainers. So what you get is this little bit that goes down. Sorry to open all this stuff, but so you get these guys, and they sit. There's so the valve is in the cylinder head like this. These sit. There's a little thing that you will have, which you put a valve guide in. It's like a little sleeve. You gotta like hammer them in or something. Brian Crowler doesn't make some, so I use the Super Tech ones. There's a couple others out there. And they're usually pretty cheap to get. And so there's a little flat part that sits right there, and then your spring sits in between here, and then you have another one that's on top that holds your spring in, and then your cam cap sits up there. You've got the other retainer there that will pull out. These are individually packaged. Get nice little baggies for them. You can see this one's a lot tighter clearance to hold your spring. This will actually sit. I got that upside down, so I'm sorry about that. And then the last thing that you got is springs. Now, what's the point of upgrading springs? The whole point of upgrading springs is to, at higher RPM, prevent your valve from floating. And what happens is your engine is spinning so fast that there's not enough spring pressure to pull that valve back shut, and so you're getting combustion cycles with your valve not completely seated in the head. And what will happen is, you know, you're losing power at high RPMs, which isn't good. So these guys sit down like that. These guys sit like this. They fit all nicely together. Again, you've got your keepers up top. It'll clamp into this little notch, and your valve stem guide. And these are quite a bit stiffer. I gave away all my OEM springs to somebody that needed them, so I don't have one to show you. But the OEM spring, you can compress it with one hand pretty easily. These guys are quite a bit stiffer. I don't know the exact force that it takes to compress them, but they also have, you know, 2 springs in them. You can see. I think they call this a beehive, but these beehives will kind of, you know, bow out a little bit. I wouldn't quite call these beehives. But the cool thing about having 2 springs is, let's say a spring breaks, you're not going to grenade your motor. You at least have a backup spring. Things will run a little goofy, you'll get some weird mixtures and stuff, but if you let off of it, it's still going to allow that valve to close, and you can still, you know, throttle down, take the motor out before you destroy anything. It's kind of like an extra safety feature. And you'll notice the inside spring compresses a lot easier. And they have different spring rates for both of these. So that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a set of valves and springs. Make sure it's all there. Make sure you have a full set. And make sure whoever is building your heads completely understands what is going on with these motors. The heads for these are a lot different than like an LS car or your typical hot rod motor. So make sure, you know, they have the right stuff and to work on them. It takes kind of a special valve compressor or valve spring compressor to get these out. It's not too special and they're not too expensive, but there's some the way that the head sets up, it's a little different, and so we may grab the head and slap a set of these in so you can kind of see what they look like in the position. Alright, so what we're kind of going to do, just because we can, is put one of these valves in. This head doesn't have the valve guides, but we're going to just show you. This is the intake valve. There's a special hole, I mean it's the hole that it goes into. Actually, this does have valve guides, I was wrong. Sorry. And you can see, you're going to have, 2 for each cylinder for intake, 2 for each for exhaust. This is a dual overhead cam motor. If you have like the NA single overhead cams, it won't quite look like this, but it'll be. And fun fact, you'll have most likely a crack on your spark plug hole. That's normal for the NA motors. So these fit fine, but you definitely want to lap them at the very least. But I would suggest kind of making new angle grinds on them to get better flow, since this one's an OEM valve, it looks like, because I don't think these were milled out yet. So that's what it looks like on the front. You can see, the cam's going to push that in. It's going to let air and fuel mixture in, and then shut for the combustion cycle. And then, as the thing with the bigger cam is, you'll have the exhaust valve and the intake valve kind of overlapped, open at the same time, essentially. That will let your exhaust gases that are leaving suck in air from the intake side at the same time. So it's like your exhaust gases flow out, this one closes, and this one stays open a little bit longer and shuts, and then you blow it up again. So that's kind of the plus side of running bigger cams. And so we'll look at this side over here so you can see it. These are where your buckets would go on most cars. Some of the older ones, they used a shim, variable size shim. So you're going to drop, this is the valve seat, it goes in that way, and your spring will go in. And then what you'll notice, I don't know if you can see that or not, I am not even close to getting this thing where I could put a keeper on it. Like, it's going to take quite a bit of compression. So that's why you got to have a valve spring compressor in order to compress that down, because these are under tension when they're all in place. And then once this is all set up, you'll have your little bucket that goes on over the top of this, or your shim, and that's what your cam interacts with to push and release these valves. So that should kind of be your Valve 101 guide. There's a lot of valves out there. Just make sure that they're using standard materials, high grade steel, stainless steel. You really want stainless with these kind of things, because they're going to get corroded, especially the exhaust side, from all that carbon that builds up from burning gas and ethanol and all the other fuels. So keep that in mind, and hope you can figure out whatever valves you want to use in your application. If y'all have any questions or anything, feel free to comment, and hope y'all have a nice day.